Welcome back to Twin Tech 2020, and welcome today to our finale, the Digital Rubicon, our digital futures. What you're about to witness, or maybe I should say what we're about to experience together, has been a labor of love over the past 6 months. Not just selecting speakers and designing a program, but in addition to that, determining how we weave content together in a way that is not only relevant for where we are now in time, but timeless in terms of where we're going. I'm hoping you have the opportunity to spend the next 4.5, 5 hours with us. I know that's a lot to ask. It's a lot to ask. But if you can, I'm hoping you can weave together the experience of the 4 different blocks of our Twin Tech 2020 finale. If not, of course, all of the content will be available online to come, but hopefully you can spend this moment of time with all of us, with our Twinians all around the world and all of our friends in cyberspace. With that, I'd like to roll some introductory remarks from a pre-recorded segment and then come back to the studio here in Chicago, where I'll be joined by Christy Ross, one of my co-hosts for the day. So with that, let's run the intro video. Welcome to Twin Tech 2020, the Digital Rubicon, beyond the pandemic. Rather than wallowing in the crisis as we all have been compelled to do, let's spend today thinking about the future. What should we do now to be prepared, and what futures do we desire to create? The images you see behind me are from the David Rumsey map collection at Stanford University. As our Twinians know, we have a close relationship with this collection. David Rumsey enables us to use any of his images for whatever purpose we like. We believe in his purpose, and he believes in ours. These images are from a 19th century set of drawings done in Italy based on archaeological evidence and other documentation of ancient Rome. They're their best guess of the design of that great city. What struck me about these images was the geometricity, the linearity of them. They seemed similar in concept to me to circuit diagrams we use today. They each represent to me the efforts humans make to create order within a very uncertain world. Let's return now to ancient Rome and our metaphor, the digital Rubicon. We all know this metaphor. Once you've crossed that Rubicon, whatever it is, there's no turning back. You've made your decision. And what some of us know is the derivation of this concept. It comes from the decision that Julius Caesar made in 49 BC to lead his 13th legion across the Rubicon River to Rome. For centuries, Rome had a stricture against anyone carrying an army across the Rubicon River. In so doing, they were effectively declaring war on the Roman Republic. So everyone with Caesar that day knew that they were either on their way to glorious victory or utter defeat. And by utter defeat, I mean certain death. While none of us chose to face this pandemic, but certainly there is no turning back. And so the choice we do have is, what do we do now, and where do we go in the future? The last time ancient Rome took on an outsized role in Western history was the Renaissance. This building, the Villa Barbaro, located outside Venice and the Veneto, constructed for a wealthy Venetian, it was designed by the paragon of Renaissance architecture, Palladio, who was bringing his version of classical ideas into the modern day, and his colleague, the painter Veronese, who was hired to paint the interiors of the home. Imagine that dream team designing your summer cottage. What's particularly exciting about this building to me is not just that it's a beautiful structure, but also that, in a way, it represents an early version of virtual reality. For instance, in these frescoes inside the building, you'll notice these gentlemen here on the top of the structure. These are actually family members from the owner of the villa. He asked Veronese to represent family members throughout the building, various favored servants and family pets, such as that dog up in the corner. That is the actual family pet, in order to create a version of reality every moment of every day. And over here, underneath the obligatory floating baby, a favorite of the Renaissance, is this fellow peeking in on the Virgin Mary and Jesus for the last 500 years. Now that's a photobomb. The Villa Barbaro represents to me one of the earliest versions of an attempt at true virtual reality, everyday lived experience modified by our vision for the world. Creating virtual worlds has not been limited by our desires. We've certainly wanted to do this for millennia. Creating virtual worlds has instead been limited by capability. We simply couldn't do the things that we wanted to do to modify our lived experience. And increasingly, we can. Today, I'd like you to reflect on what could be possible when anything is possible. Reflect on what could be possible when literally anything eventually could be possible. Now I'd like to return somewhat closer to home, my home, and anyone who's been to Chicago knows what this is, the mighty Lake Michigan. The images you see behind me were created by Chicago artist Lincoln Schatz. Lincoln has, over the past 6 years, taken hundreds of photos of this great lake at various moments of the day. And one of the many impressive aspects of his work is, if you look at his diptychs and triptychs and images of the lake, you will see that the horizon is always an exact match across the entire space. So you can see the transitions and the various faces of this great body of water. And our lake has many faces. Sometimes she looks like this. Other times she looks more like this. And sometimes she looks like this. To me, this image resonates most with where we are today. Today at Twin Tech 2020, we'll be on a journey, a story with a beginning, middle, and end. I encourage you to experience, to the extent you can, the next 4.5 hours. We've called on our friends from all over the world to contribute their insights, their experiences, and their visions for the future. I hope that they contribute as well to yours. We'll start with the corporate imperative. What are the issues and challenges facing corporate leadership? What should you be doing and thinking right now to be prepared for after this pandemic passes? What are the opportunities and risks we face in living far better lives? How do we navigate complexity, and how do complex systems react to extraordinary shocks like pandemics? And what does science tell us about where we might be going next? And finally, as so often we do at Twin, we ask the question of purpose. Our purpose, our why, and most of all, our purpose as our future. Thank you again for joining us. Your attention is your most valuable resource, and we never take this lightly. I look forward to our journey together. Thank you and welcome back. And I'm joined here in the studio by Christy Ross. Christy is the co-CEO of Tasty Trade, a great entrepreneur here in Chicago, and one of my co-hosts for this morning. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Great, and you're actually new to us at Twin, right? Introduced by Howard Tullman, so we're really happy to have a new set of eyes here.
I am super excited to see how everything unfolds today.
So are we. So with that, and speaking of unfolding, have you ever been to Estonia?
I have not.
You have not? Well, you're in for a treat, because we are right now going to go to Estonia without any jet lag. We might have time lag or internet lag, but certainly no jet lag. So let's try the lags, and I am very pleased to introduce to our stage Kadri Vorand and Michael Malgund, who are both extraordinary Estonian musicians. Now, when this session's over, I urge you to go to YouTube. I urge you to look up Kadri and Michel's work. It's absolutely stunning and unexpected. I'll let their work speak for themselves after a brief performance, which is, by the way, live from Tallinn, Estonia. We'll have a brief chat. Kadri and Michel, it's all yours.
I'm in love with the roses you brought. I'm not in I'm in love with the car you bought. I'm not in love with you. I'm in love with the breakfasts we made. I'm not in love with you. I'm in love with the poems you made. I'm not in love with you. I'm in love with the plans for our wedding day, and in love with the babies we'll make, but not with you, but not with you. You, I'm in love with the roses you brought. I'm not in love with you. I'm in love with the car you bought. I'm not in love with you. I'm in love with the plans for our wedding day, and in love with the babies we'll make, but not with you, but not with you. You, I'm in love with the plans for our wedding day, and in love with the babies we'll make, but not with you, 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 but not with you.
Great. How do we do a virtual clap? Michal and Kadri, thanks so much. Kadri, you're in a professional studio right now. Where are you in Michal?
We are here live from Estonia National Broadcast Union, studio number 1.
Well, thank you so much for making the time and for the broadcast studio to have you there so you could be with us today. That was a stunning piece. I remember actually this was the first piece I heard of yours when Sten Christian Salavir introduced me to your work. I went to YouTube, happened to click on this link, and I know quite well what a piccolo sounds like. So I was looking on stage for a piccolo, and then I realized it was in your throat. That's your voice, is that correct?
That's my voice, plus some help and some extra from my electronic effects. So yeah, it's a combination of those two.
Yeah, so you've created digital amplification and modifications of your voice. So this is really a digital Rubicon scat singing, to take the traditional scat singing of jazz vocal. So tell us, Kadri, how has the pandemic impacted your work as an artist?
It has affected, I guess, the live shows part, obviously. But my music, I think I still write from my deepest place in my heart, and that hasn't changed. And I think the only thing that has changed is that I've had more time to spend in nature, and that's in my nature to spend some time in nature. But we actually have been quite lucky over here in Estonia to have also live concerts. Unfortunately, we weren't able to fly that much around the world, but we are very lucky with Mikael that we have given quite a lot of concerts here.
That's great, but I also recall that when the pandemic first hit and people went in a bit into lockdown, Estonia has a tradition already of home concerts. Is that true, where musicians would perform at their home, or they would go to other people's homes and perform? So there was a little bit of a cultural prep for the pandemic. So tell us a little bit about the difference between performing live in front of an audience, performing live on a screen like we just did, or performing for a pre-recording. And I should share with everybody that Kadri and Mikael have not only performed this for us, but they've also, over the last hour, been pre-recording live, so recorded live, you can figure out what that means, pre-recording some music for our conclusion later today, and then also a longer gift for us that we're excited to see later on today. That was all recorded live this morning. Tell us about your experience, the difference between performing live, or pre-recording live, or just for a recording in a studio.
Well, recording in a studio, I guess, is it's not a live situation, because you can make some corrections or make another take. But when you're live, then you're live. And that's why today we are also live for you. And we were at least lucky that our connection wasn't lost, and we were able to play you one song instantly from here. I guess the biggest difference of recording live is that giving a concert or playing a song is a dialogue with the audience. I will get some energy from you and decide what is my next sentence, like in a very normal dialogue. But when you are behind your screens, it's really hard to feel your energy. So I must kind of imagine what you are thinking of from my previous experience. Of course, that helps a bit. Yeah. But I guess when I enter the song and I start to play, I still go so deep that then at this point, it doesn't really make any difference, because when we create music, then we do that. But when the song ends, then you are used to get the feedback and hear the applause or see people's faces.
You said you were pre-recording a segment as if it was live for someone, and you had an epiphany about this, that you were getting into the same zone because you had convinced yourself, I am performing this live, there's no studio audience, but we're recording this live, and you got into a similar zone while you were performing. And that's something I think we all have to learn as we navigate into this new world. So Kadri and Mikael, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time to be live with us this morning. I can't wait to share more of your work later on in this program at the end for the conclusion of TwinTech 2020. I very much hope to see you in person at some point, perhaps at another Twin event in the world after the pandemic. And cueing off of your song, we're in love with the music you make, but I have to say I think that the world is probably also in love with the two of you. So thank you so much for what you bring to the world.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Great, great. Cheers. Well, Christy, what do you think?
That was so incredibly moving. It really was. I feel like I have a flavor of Estonia now.
Well, I mean, this is, talk about best foot forward. Mm-hmm. Our good friend and Twinian Sten Christian Salavir, who is, in addition to being in the tech community in Estonia, which is the digital nation. I mean, if you want to see who's right out front, there are a few countries in the world, and one of them is Estonia. Mm-hmm. So we took a twin expedition there last year to Finland and Estonia, thanks to Karina Koskinen-Lusta, Juhani Talvia, the former Prime Minister of Finland, Esko Aho, invited us, and Sten and his crew invited us to Estonia, and they were stunning visits. But in addition to
What was your takeaway? What was your biggest takeaway?
First of all, the food was great. I mean, and I don't just mean like, oh, it's really good. The quality, the extent to which the chefs go there and the service staff and everybody coming together to create an experience, it was really extraordinarily unexpected. But as the Estonians will explain to you, when you have a history like they do, only gaining independence really in around 1991, and then having a, let's just say, fairly large and powerful neighbor who isn't always friendly, you get really innovative. And they have become extraordinarily innovative. So I hope we all get a chance to visit there in person.
When we can get on a plane again. That's on my bucket list now.
When we get on a plane, we got a lot of buckets here at Twin, but you're welcome to walk along with us with all those buckets. So Christy, welcome to Twin.
Yes, thank you so much for having me here. I am really excited about this whole day and actually this whole conference. Some incredible content.
Thank you. Well, tell me a little bit about Tasty Trade and but before that, who are you? What do you bring to the world? What's most important to you in your professional life?
In my professional life, so I have been in and around trading and brokerage for my whole career, basically. And I would say that financial literacy is something that really is important to me. But we started Tasty Trade 10 years ago with a purpose to empower the self-directed investor. And so I co-lead an ecosystem of fintech companies, and one of them, Tasty Trade, the parent company, we do 50 different shows about trading in the financial markets.
And all the time. You have like 10
Every
hours
day.
of content a day, which is extraordinary.
And it's all live and it's all original programming. But there's one show that we do that is not trading related. It's all about entrepreneurship. And so I have the honor every day to interview new CEOs and founders, and we provide a platform so they can tell their story. They talk about what they built, why they built it, how they built it. But I have to share that during the pandemic, it has granted us sort of this window into their worlds and allowed us to see the challenges that they're experiencing and really sort of, the road ahead for them.
Right.
And so hopefully I'll get to share some of those insights today.
You know what, let's do a little bit of that right now, because there's nothing better to ground us than talking about or being with people who are really pushing that boulder up the hill, who are really trying to make something big happen. And there's nobody like that more than an independent entrepreneur, especially when they're first starting out. It's one thing when you're Steve Jobs or Glenn Tolman starting a new business, you've done it many times, which is great. But when you're that new entrepreneur doing it for the first time, and then the pandemic hits.
Yes.
Give us an example. Tell us a story about somebody that's resonated with you, an entrepreneur through this pandemic.
Yes. So, boy, there are so many. So to choose from them is really hard. If I can first give an overarching theme that has, that everybody sort of has expressed. Everyone has come together, or I should say sort of looked introspectively, that everything comes back down to people, and people matter. Whether it's your families, whether it's your employees, your vendors, your customers, across the board. And so it was really more about stopping and sort of slowing down. And
that was sort of foisted on all of us, whether we were into the idea or not.
Yes.
Hey, look, take a moment. Right? And so how is that affecting entrepreneurs?
So I one of the big things is about decisions and decision making. And that has to happen every day no matter what. But they're taking in another layer, meaning that they are really taking a close look at people and how people are affected. The thing that has been key for a lot of entrepreneurs is communication. That sounds so basic, right? But communication of whatever decision it is that they've made is so critical. It's critical every day, but when you're in this type of scenario, it really matters that much more, because there's so much anxiety around what's happening in the world, in your country, in your industry, in your company, right? That added communication can at least bring some of that anxiety down.
Yeah, that's great, and it ties back to something that Brian Collins shared with us yesterday. So Brian is a fabulous entrepreneur in New York, founder of the design firm Collins, and he said during the pandemic, I've learned a ton about how you really have to stop you have to set time, create time to have human conversations with your team that have nothing to do with business. And he shared with us that the hardest part of that was making sure that the conversation didn't move back into the business realm.
Right.
And you got to get business done, but especially during this time, you also have to have the heart-to-heart conversations that, honestly, tech entrepreneurs, you don't think tech entrepreneur and heart-to-heart very often. No offense to our tech entrepreneur friends.
Yeah.
So,
well, one
great.
other thing I'll add too is when it comes to tech,
Yeah.
a lot of companies thought they were prepared for this, pandemic, if you will, or the effects of the pandemic. When in reality, some of those newer companies thought that, especially the ones that, not the ones that were negatively affected, but
Right.
really the ones that were positively affected.
Right.
When you look at, everything from ed tech to financial services, online payments, really when you look at telehealth, all of those things, you need to have an infrastructure that can handle that additional volatility.
Right.
And we've come to find, and I'll just speak about the financial services, we have newer companies that their systems failed because the infrastructure wasn't strong enough. They didn't get it done fast enough. And then you have the older companies that their legacy technology was never sort of built for this kind
holding them
of
back now.
growth. Right. And so you see sort of on both ends of the spectrum. Robinhood is a good example. On the new front, their systems were down for a few days. You have TD Ameritrade, who had multiple day issues. So you
Your
have this
company before Thinkorswim was purchased by TD Ameritrade.
that is correct. That is correct. And then we're sort of right in the middle here. We
Right.
have that wonderful experience, but we have new technology, and we've invested a ton of resources. Like, we feel like the right balance because our systems were up, and but I knock on wood because that could happen to any technology company, really.
Right, right. So we'll come back to this, and we'll have some more conversations. And Christy and I will be joined by Moran Cerf later on this morning, our co-host. Moran is everybody's favorite neuroscientist here at Twin. And you're all familiar with Moran and his work if you've been with us. So Christy and Moran are going to be experiencing the journey today, just like all of us. And we're going to be looking to their insights as entrepreneurs, as chief financial officer, as a neuroscientist, as human beings, into what they're hearing. So with this, I'd like to transition to our first block of this journey, the corporate imperative. What are the things that should be front and center in leadership's minds, whether you're running a global corporation, an independent entrepreneurial firm, an NGO, or you're in government, whatever your sector, what are the strategic near-term and long-term questions and challenges that should be on your mind? What should be on your radar screen? No one better to explore this than my great friend, co-author in a book for next year known as Proximity, Kaihan Krippendorf. Kaihan and I have been working on this book, Proximity, about how digital technologies push the production and provision of value ever closer to the moment of demand. And that book will be out next year. Kaihan reached out to his friends Navi Raju and Rita Gunter-McGrath to talk about what these three business thought leaders in the world would recommend to corporate leadership. And with that, I'd like to turn the pre-recorded floor over to Kaihan, Rita, and Navi.
All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Kaihan Krippendorf, and I'm thrilled to be able to facilitate this session with Rita McGrath and Navi Raju. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, but let me tell you a little about why I'm so thrilled that they sat down with us to talk to us about the digital transformation that large enterprises have been going through, and particularly now need to go through at an accelerated pace. In my work, I've found that right now there are 7 key barriers that large enterprises are struggling with as they make sense of and adopt digital technologies. And as you'll see, I think, hopefully I believe we'll conclude that it's not about the technology as much as about the mindset and organization. So the key barriers are, one is really activating people and seeing them as innovators. The next is having them understand what the strategy is and making sure the strategy is not a very complex thing, but something that everyone can rally behind. The next is around options and generating managing lots of options. And that's something that Rita McGrath has written a lot about. The next is what I call value blockers or business model conflict, and learning how to redesign business models. And both of our guests today have done a lot of work around business model innovation. Then what happens after you kind of design the business model is taking action on that. And that is about conducting inexpensive experiments, or as Navi calls them, frugal innovations, which requires a very different mindset than many that is embedded in many large enterprises. Then it's about teaming and creating a cross-functional team around that. And then there's the big messy stuff that's around leadership and culture and the organizational structures. And so if we went through that, what we'll see is that both Rita and Navi have worked in all 7 of those and can help us understand and unlock the barriers across all of those. So I'm wondering, for either one of you, do you see the current context we're in, do you see it resembling any other historical inflection, maybe in the adoption of new technologies or any kind of macro forces that force a change? So what does this remind you of, and what can we learn from that time, if either of you have a response?
I mean, my personal experience is, you see, I arrived in America in 1999. I was thinking actually this morning that I went through 2 major crises, right? There was a 9/11, right? 9/11 happened, and, the economy took a hit, and people were kind of a bit scared. And at the same time, there were these amazing new technologies arriving, right, with internet. So what I found at that time is that even though there was amazing technologies available, people mindset, it was all about survival, right? They were thinking and acting in a very tactical way. And similarly, when 2008, the financial crisis happened, there was a kind of similar pattern that repeated itself. My concern this year is that as we speak right now in August, is that most people look at technology in a very tactical way. And because the emotions driving them right now is primarily fear, insecurity. So I think it's important that, before we think about how to apply technology, we actually, operate with the different emotions, whether it's empathy, compassion, or it could be a sense of purpose. These are kind of more positive, in a way, emotions. And these also allow you to project more in the future rather than like, how can I make, next quarter, right? Kind of very tactical horizon. And right now, I would say that the dominant emotion I see right now is a mix of fear and uncertainty. And that may not be the most conducive to really drive radical digital transformation.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have the human side, you have the technological side, you have that human technology interface, and we certainly have a disruption on the human side. But I think what's interesting about now is that this disruption is also accelerating technologies that were underway. And so, Rita, the same question to you. What do you equate this to or associate this with?
Sure. So I think what we see happening with COVID is, I'll call it a great unfreezing. So a lot of the assumptions underlying business, society, the social contract, all those things are now being really questioned. And I think we now have permission to ask questions that even 9 months ago we wouldn't have considered asking. And I think the analogy I would draw is to either the depths of the Great Depression, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt talked about a rendezvous with destiny and said, we can't have the critical means of production in the hands of a few people. We need to broaden prosperity more broadly. And then again, after World War II, again, a huge trauma that caused us to really question where we were in the world. When business leaders got together and said, our main commitment is to create good jobs in this economy. What they were staring at was 30 million people who, are trained in combat, coming home and not having jobs for them. I mean, that's not a socially very harmonious thing to be contemplating. And they said, our role as business people and in alliance with the government sector and other sectors is to ensure the health of our communities. We're going to create good jobs. We're going to be helpful to the community. We're going to do, a lot of things. And that is a consensus that really got very disrupted in, I would say, beginning in the late 70s, through now, where we've essentially had income inequality at levels that are just not sustainable. We've had many people calling for the reinvention of capitalism. We've had many people saying, no, we need a new and different social contract. Now, I think right now we're still at the lip service stage of this, but I think those organizations can get out ahead of this and say, hang on, there's a better way of balancing what we're doing against the social and economic impacts and environmental impacts. I think those are the companies that are more likely to get out ahead of this.
Rita, if you could look back at the Great Depression and you look at which organizations thrived and which ones fell behind, what else do you see as, like, say, I don't know, key success factors or insights that we can adopt to try to be those that thrive?
Well, let me give a couple of statistics. If you took a typical company, and it's not the Great Depression, but you took a typical company in 1970, and you asked what happened to their profits. A typical publicly traded company in America in 1970, 50% of their profits went to wages and to R&D. So what they did was they were making big investments in people and talent and capability, and big investments in building new technologies, new things. Basically, what you have is a long-term investment in people, so that you retain earnings, you retain your people. They in turn give their ingenuity, and as you talked about, the ingenuity of ordinary people, to the company for the long term. They also invest in supporting R&D that really supports them. So fast forward to 2015, take that same prototypical American company that's publicly traded, 9%. That's not even double digits. 9% of their profits are going into salaries and into wages and into discovery. So what you've got is a very radical, if you think about it, this all happened in about 40 years. You've got a radical reimagining of what a company's for. And America's become a buyback economy. And so, the problem with this is you've decimated the middle class. You've got 36 million new jobs were indeed created in the last great expansion, but they're horrible jobs. They pay less than $15 an hour, and they don't offer stable hours. So I think the short answer, Kaihan, to the question of what can we learn from the past is, to the extent that everybody commonly invests in capabilities in people, capabilities in communities, and new technological discoveries, we all benefit.
Got it. Yes. And Navi, this reminds me a little bit of what we were talking about leading up to this, is kind of the investing in people and investing in skills that allow people to discover those new innovations or those new possibilities. I know you spent a lot of time studying that. Can you just tell us a little bit about what it takes to invest in people in the right way?
Sure. When we talk about investing, right, it's not about a quantitatively, right, measuring quantitatively, like, oh, yes, we spend, X billion in R&D, right? Because research shows, actually, PwC has done this incredible study, right, for the past almost, 14 years now. Repeatedly, they show that there's no correlation between how much you invest in R&D and your financial performance. So it's not about, how much you invest in people quantitatively, but rather what kind of culture you create. Right? Do you create a kind of permissive culture, permissive in the sense that you give the kind of autonomy and the freedom to people to experiment with, disruptive ideas. One company I can think of which has done quite well is Ford, the car maker, which in Detroit set up a makerspace. So this is a kind of a workshop where the engineers could spend, their spare time, evenings, weekends, to go tinker and essentially take an idea, a crazy, wacko idea, and then go there and create a prototype. And then they have a community of other entrepreneurs and thinkers with whom they can test ideas, validate them, improve them. And within 2 years of running this kind of open makerspace, they increase the number of patents by 100%. But it's not just the number of patents, but the quality of patents. And building on Rita's point, that means that they were actually developing new technologies that were actually game-changing, market-shaping, rather than inventing stuff that is optimizing the existing markets.
There's so much there. Rita, just three things that come to mind that remind me of your work is, one is, how do you know what type of activity around innovation is actually productive and not productive? And then how do you judge these different types of innovation? Do you have the transformative innovations or the smaller innovations? I'd love to hear your thoughts on any or all of those.
Sure. So I think the first observation I would make, and this gets back to Ravi's point about what you measure, right? You can't measure innovation today in ROI terms. That's just crazy. So what I've said for a long time you need to be doing is thinking in terms of options. So the fruitful innovations to pursue, even if you're making a small move, even if it seems incremental at first, are the ones where you can make a small investment, get a small toehold, but it opens up, a huge amount of potential future opportunities. So essentially what you're doing is taking out a small bet that buys you the right, but not the obligation to make a series of subsequent bets. And that's how you build option value into the investments that you're making. A second big idea, I think, is that when we think of decision making in business, right, and we're all in this sort of panic mode right now, but I think it's just hugely important to think that you're always dealing with three kinds of indicators when you're making a choice. So the first are lagging indicators. It's great data, but it's telling you about what's already happened. And unfortunately, most of the data I still see most leading executives use is lagging, right? It's today's quarter, last week's, whatever. To illustrate, Jeff Bezos was congratulated by an analyst for having had a great quarter for Amazon. And he turned and he said, "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. The quarter I just had is a function of decisions I made 4 years ago." So that's lagging indicators. Then you have current indicators, which tell you where you are. So things like your net promoter scores, your employee engagement scores, they kind of tell you what's the state of play at the moment. Now, the hardest kind of data to get, and the one that's most valuable with respect to these resource allocation decisions, are leading indicators. And it is the rare leader who really tries to get the organization focused on these leading indicators of what's going to drive our business. So a couple of misconceptions about leading indicators. The first is that the quality of a leading indicator is measured by how accurately it is predictive. I don't think that's the case at all. What you should measure it by is, did it cause us to be prepared in the right way? So that's the first thing. Second thing, I think people have a tendency to confuse preferences and predictions. We all know what kind of future we prefer, but whether that's actually the future I'm anticipating or not is a completely different question. So last point on the leading indicator theme is a company that's done this brilliantly is Microsoft. And what their CEO, Satya Nadella, has said is, a leading indicator for us as we move into the cloud and as we try to have more penetration in people's lives is usage. And we don't get usage until we get customer love. And I recently completed a purchase from the Microsoft store, and I could not believe this. They actually asked me in the little post-purchase survey that I got, did you love your experience with Microsoft? I thought, whoa, that's just a completely different mode for the company.
So, I guess, my question for you, Rita, and then Navi, if you have a comment as well, which sectors do you think maybe have this pent up holding back from embracing digital that now are facing the choice, kind of die or reinvent?
Everybody?
Everybody, yeah. Okay.
Everybody. So let me reframe that a little bit.
Sure.
Because, I think what we see at the surface is often not what's going on underneath. So if you look at retail, and I'll take a couple of examples. So Men's Warehouse, which just announced bankruptcy, Lord & Taylor. What you have in those cases is financially engineered companies. Kraft Heinz, another one in food. So those companies were caught in a financialized system where the things that happened to them had nothing to do with their business, but everything to do with where their resources were taken. Same with travel companies, right? The same with hotels. Hotels don't own their properties anymore. They're just branding entities sitting on top of a bunch of real estate REITs, right? Boeing, $45 billion in share buybacks over the last 10 years. So a lot of these companies are living with self-inflicted wounds. And part of what I'm really hoping we come out of this situation with is a much greater realization that you weaken yourself so much by having these weak balance sheets, by having so much debt, by just giving out so much resources to shareholders, that when there's any kind of bump in the road, if you look at a lot of those retailers, they were struggling before this happened.
The sector that I would pick up, Kayan, which I've been always obsessed about, is healthcare. Especially since I came to this country. I mean, you talk about being Indian and French, right? We have a social safety net, right? The healthcare is universal, right? In France, and it's publicly funded. Of course, in this country, it's private. But the scary thing about America is that, we spend the most on healthcare per capita. But if you look at all the indicators, right, we don't do well. As a matter of fact, even life expectancy, right, is stagnating, which is an aberration for, the world's richest country. And then we saw during this crisis how dysfunctional the healthcare system is. So I actually see, and there are some examples I'll give you which are mind-boggling. What's happening is that the hospitals, right, the big hospitals, the HMOs as we call them, they are beginning to innovate. They are setting up their own innovation center. So 2 examples which are really disruptive. There is an initiative called Civica RX, which is about 1,000 hospitals, which I believe account for 60% of spending in this country, are ganging together to produce their own generic drugs. So they are saying, look, I don't want to buy drugs from big pharma because its price is jack up, right, unpredictably, or there's a supply shortage, right, like right now. So I want to be self-reliant, right? So the power is shifting from supply side, right, to demand side. That's for the drugs. Then you look at, I'm writing a case study on Penn Medicine, which is part of the University of Pennsylvania, the oldest medical school in America. And they have their own innovation center, right? They are massively transitioning to telemedicine. So that's everybody does that. But they're also developing their own medical devices, right? Which are more affordable, right? Easy to use, right? So, and of course they use technology, right, to accelerate this whole process. So that fascinates me, right? If healthcare, which is such an important sector in this country, can be disrupted not by outside actors, but within, where the demand side, right, the hospitals say, I'm going to actually self-empower myself by ganging together. So this is the last thing I would say, is that one big trend we are going to see from this crisis is this notion of B2B sharing, where businesses like hospitals, right, start sharing the resources and say, like, why don't we optimize, each other's assets?
What would be your agenda for a CEO that is thinking digital transformation? I've been resisting it, and now in COVID, I need to prepare my company for the uncertainty that we're facing. What would be your top few things on that agenda?
I have something a bit radical, and I'm going to use Decathlon as an example. And what this company Decathlon is doing, and they started a year ago. You can visit it. It's called Decathlon 2030. It's the world's largest exercise I know, where they're using digital technologies to co-create the vision of the company. So what Decathlon of the future will look like by working with 1 million people who include their employees, about 200,000, as well as their customers. That's important, because young customers particularly want to co-create with brands, not only products, but potentially, new business models, and their suppliers and the partners, okay? And what is fascinating is that they started exercise 1 year ago using open innovation platforms, right, to brainstorm and ideate, etc. And then COVID happened. So they basically ended up creating a vision for what the whole company should move towards for the next 10 years. And then they made a bold decision last week that they renamed that from Vision 2030 to Vision 2021.
Wow.
They said, we are not going to wait 10 years to implement this vision, right? We are going to roll it out in the next 12 months. And by the way, the vision had to do with redefining, the industry of sports in the future, redefining cities, communities in the future, and the planet, right? With the climate change, etc. So that, I think, is an important kind of framework to think about, like, what are you reinventing, right? Are you reinventing with technology the what, how? If you do that, you're just optimizing. I call it optimizers. You redefine the why. That is what I call leapfrogging. But then, like Decathlon, you can redefine the who fundamentally, right? And in which case, you become a trailblazer. So it's a choice about, how bold you want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think that going from 2030 to 2021 really captures nicely what we're living right now.
Right.
Yeah. Beautiful. And how about you, Rita? What would be your advice here, talking to a CEO?
Well, I think the first piece of advice sort of echoes what Navi was saying, which is you you really need to go back and relook at your strategy, right? So what customers are you serving? What's your reason for being here? What's your mission on this planet? And then that needs to flow through to how you're spending your resources. So I would use a portfolio model and really look at, what are we investing in that's sort of here and now? What are we investing in that's near field? What are we investing in that has that kind of options flavor that I talk about? And I think that's a major thing. I also think there's a need to really think about what you're going to stop doing. And there's an awful lot of activity going on right now, which is sort of just kind of a continuation of what we were doing before without anybody really asking what. So to pick a sector near and dear to my own heart, look at higher education all across the country. They do not know what to do if we can't have in-person instruction safely. And so there's all these processes and practices and things that are happening that are just kind of on autopilot. And nobody stopped and said, if I were to take 2 giant steps backward and reimagine this experience and build in some of what we would be missing, build in the glee club and build in the cheering for teams and build in, how would we reimagine that? And I think we have done a very poor job so far. We haven't been forced yet to do that. The encouraging thing, and I'll be on an optimistic note here, and if I just stick with higher ed, every single social trauma we've ever had as a country has resulted in some real innovation in the way that we educate people. So you think of the emergence of the land grant colleges, after the Civil War, or the post-World War II GI Bill, which basically made that sort of higher education accessible to so many people, and. So I think what will emerge from what I suspect is going to be a pretty apocalyptic season for many institutions of higher education will be a real reinvention of what that means.
Is there anything that you didn't get to say or didn't get to share that you think would be valuable for a leader looking to drive through digital transformation through COVID? Any tip or anything?
Absolutely. The tip is it may sound kind of touchy-feely, but this is something that I'm practicing myself. I call it post-vitam. So there's a concept called post-mortem, right, where you look at the root cause of what went wrong, right? That everybody does. But post-vitam, vitam means vitality, right? Life in Latin. So I think what I think companies should do is look at what went right during this crisis. What are the things that we did well during this crisis? What are the things where, for example, we saw more solidarity, right? Maybe people improvising solutions, right? There was more agility in the company. There was more sharing of information, right? So identify, and that's what Decathlon did, by the way, right? The company I talked about, right? They tried to do this exercise of identifying and celebrating the things that actually worked well during this crisis. And see, and I think I build on Rita's point. You're right. There's certain things you have to let go, but maybe the other things you want to retain, particularly things that went right, during this crisis. And how do we amplify them, right? So that will be the big tip. Because what happens is psychologically, as you know, when we face a trauma, we want to move on, right? We don't want to go back and revisit that. But of course, there's a good and the bad, right?
In everything.
Traumatic events. So it's important to use the discernment.
Thank you. Rita, same 2 questions for you.
Sure. So I wrote, and it just got published in May, a Harvard Business Review article called "The Discovery-Driven Digital Transformation," which basically says, if you want to go on a digital transformation journey, don't do what all those failed innovators I started out talking about do, which is, you have this huge program and some big consulting firm sells you this bill of goods and blah, 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 blah. Instead, what you want to do is start with something that's tangible, that's beneficial, that's small, with the end in mind, right? You have a big ambitious goal in mind, but don't start there. So the example I would use would be the German metals distribution company Klockner, that looked at their supply chain and they were like, oh my God, people are still placing orders by fax. And so one of the first things their CEO did, which I thought was really smart, after his homegrown efforts to do this at corporate headquarters sort of failed, he sent 2 engineers to Berlin, which is the Silicon Valley of Germany. And he said, look, I don't care what you people do something digitally that makes us easier to do business with for our customers. And what they basically focused on was, let's replace the fax system. And so what was interesting to me and what was smart about this was So you put your order in a digital device of some kind, and it hits the sort of wall of the Klockner system. On the other side of that wall, nothing changes. Which is really important, right? So as far as the people on the other side, the receiving end, whether it's a fax or whether it's digital, doesn't bother them. So you don't instantly create these organizational antibodies. So, yeah. and then maybe the next thing we do is, okay, once we've got electronic orders, maybe we have electronic picking. And so you can, have a label that says where the thing is in the store. That's even better, right? So what they did was gradually, right? And one of the other things I thought they did that was really, really smart was they said, look, there's some things startups and entrepreneurs are really, really good at. And there's some things the established company is really, really good at. And so they very deliberately created connections and communication structures between the two. And I think that's something we often get wrong. Like we think, oh, startups, that's all the buzz, and they're all great and they're doing everything right. And oh, big, stodgy, stupid firm. But if you think about it, most large organizations have enormous repositories of skills, of capabilities, of knowledge and know-how.
Yeah, and I would also add, large companies also have smart, passionate people driven by purpose that want to innovate and have an impact. Well, thank you both so much for being here and sharing with us your thoughts and wisdom at this critical time and giving us the historical context of where we are. And for me, I walk away really with both a sense of possibility and clarity on the key immediate things that we can do to realize that possibility. Thank you.
Welcome back. I am Christy Ross, and I am co-CEO of Tasty Trade. I'm also the co-host of Twin Tech Today. Today, I am really incredibly excited to talk to Gary Hoberman, who is the founder and CEO of Uncork, which is a no-code application platform that helps organizations build complex custom software faster, lower cost, and higher quality than conventional approaches. Prior to Uncork, Gary was the youngest ever managing director at Citigroup, where he spent 16 years of his career, and more recently was the executive VP and co-CIO of MetLife. Throughout his career, always focused on driving emerging technologies, which now, fast forward to Uncork, he is truly at the forefront, leading a revolution in the no-code, low-code movement. So thank you so much for joining us today, Gary.
Thank you for having me, Christy. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I have to start out with the question of what led you to start Uncork?
Yeah, so my background, I still describe myself today to anyone as a hacker. I started programming in fifth grade on IBM punch card machines, indexing comic books in my dad's publishing business. And I always loved the idea that you could take technology and it's an art form. You could build something new out of it, create something brand new. And I entered the corporate world and I love this idea of solving problems on Wall Street. Trading systems and mutual fund systems and transaction services and corporate and big Fortune 50 companies. And I spent 24 years in Fortune 50 companies leading technology and loving this idea that you could invent something new and be able to drive as fast as you can with inventing new technology. And my last job, I had 10,000 developers working for me in 47 countries, which was at MetLife. And from that perspective, what I started to see was the more we were spending money, the less value I was personally seeing come out. And I started to feel like an attorney in many ways, where I would show the business and say, Christy, you signed this, right? You wanted this. And that's why we did this for the last 3 years, spending $50 million. And it's not what you want. It's not that the regulations changed, the industry changed around you. But that's kind of what you wanted because you signed off. And so let's market green and go on. And I think that's what's happening every single day in every single company around the world right now. And I really got tired of waiting for someone else to come along and fix this. So I've tried every low-code accelerator tool out there, every cloud platform out there, and I always have these big hopes and dreams it's going to solve my problem as a CIO, and it never worked. And I wound up writing off every project, and you couldn't see the values come out. And then you look at the world of automation and RPA and you see it's Band-Aids on top of a problem and pushing the problem under the rug. So I didn't want to wait for someone else to fix it and created Uncork in 2017, and it's been an amazing journey ever since.
Oh my gosh! And you actually have this level of expertise. I read or I listened to a podcast that you had 10,000 hours of coding in by the time you were in high school. Most people can't really fit that in a lifetime. So that's very impressive. And I love the name Uncork. It's so fitting. So I have to ask you, what did you do when outsiders really tried to discredit the idea of Uncork? And then on top of that, though, how did you hire employees and really rally them around the idea when you had others that maybe were discrediting it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So our journey started with, in 2017, early 2017, trying to convince investors to back us. And I kind of knew in my head, here's what we need to do, here's how we're going to go. And I had an amazing team ready to go, and made the West Coast trip and pitched. And the feedback from the people who are the top investors were, number one, you're too old to do this. Personally, that was constructive feedback from someone. I love the word constructive because by definition, it's not constructive if I can't personally change it. But, the feedback was platform sales are hard, too hard. And it's going to take you 2 years to get into your first company after you build a platform in 2 years. So you're 4 years out. And I came back from all these meetings and I said, they don't get it. No one's lived in my shoes to see the pain and suffering, what's happening in enterprises today, spending billions of dollars. No bank should have 50,000 developers. No bank should have more than technology companies. And when you think about that, I self-funded. I basically said, we're going to do this ourselves, which meant for me and my chief technology officer, Bassam, went going back to our days as hackers and coders, and we created the first version. And what was amazing was we were live in 6 months with 5 of the largest companies in the world in the most difficult industry, insurance. And from that perspective, first thing we did was we took money that we were getting in revenue, concept, revenue before funding, interesting. Mm-hmm. And we took the concept and basically took every quote that we had heard from the top investors, and we plastered it on a wall, a 10-foot wall in the office. And I remember we spent about $300 or $400 on this quote wall, we called it. And it was every quote from, you're too old and this won't work and you're going to fail and you're not entrepreneurial enough. And that quote wall was in our second office and our third office. When we moved to our fourth office, which was 40,000 square feet on Fifth Avenue, it didn't fit. It wasn't us anymore. We've already passed by, and but it's been an amazing journey from that perspective.
I love that. I love the quote wall. So, do you think that coding, as we know it today, will become obsolete in the next 10 to 20 years, or what do you think that time frame looks like?
Yeah, I mean, there's this amazing tweet that someone did where she said, I just got my computer science degree in Stanford and I spent the last 5 hours moving a button around the screen. So what I would tell you today is there's no shortage of engineers. There's no shortage of IT talent. And specifically, all the IT talent that I've personally seen out there is all just building the next algorithm. So personally, what I'm excited most about on Quark is, if I give the analogy that an engineer is an art form, and developer word should go away, by the way. Citizen developer should be gone from our vocabulary, because a developer to me means someone hired to write code as opposed to solve a problem, which is an engineer. And if you think about all the engineers out there, it's an amazing idea to say they're free to create new algorithms and solutions that change the way we live and work, and be able to enable a future which we can't even imagine yet, as opposed to sitting there and all doing the same thing, which is, if they were chefs, they'd be working at McDonald's instead of Michelin star restaurants. We want Michelin star restaurants.
That's a great analogy, by the way. And so my next question was, developers are often defined. So maybe the answer is going to be engineers, but developers are often defined by what programming language they know how to use today, right? But how will developers be defined in the post-coding era?
Yeah, my hope is that from a compensation model, I'm going to talk compensation because it's near and dear to everyone's heart, you're compensated based on the value you bring to your organization. And the metrics used today are on time and on budget, which mean nothing for technology. Did you do it on time? Did you do it within the dollars you said? I want to know if it actually delivered the value you set out to. And the second we do that, languages don't mean anything. People want to get to market faster. They want solutions that don't set them up for long legacy. What I would tell you, Christy, is every line of code being written today in any language, whether it's Clojure or Go or Java or Node or COBOL, it's legacy. The second it exists, it's legacy for someone else tomorrow to maintain. And from that point of view, that's what we're going after. Today we built a platform that I could tell you could build everything from a trading system to an insurance system to a hospital system without ever needing an engineer or coding again.
Yeah. Well, so today, interview wouldn't be an interview without actually asking how the pandemic has affected your company and what your company has done in response to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how companies pivot and respond. First off, we've hired 150 people, which is about a third of the company or more since COVID started, that have never seen our office. They've never actually seen our headquarters. They're all over the US now and around the world. It's amazing to see the talent we're bringing in and creating opportunities for those. Because coming from the corporate world and Fortune 50 companies, I think I spent most of my life eliminating roles. Eliminating those opportunities to create them is the best feeling ever. Most importantly, when COVID hit, in New York City itself, we received a call early on to say how quickly could we respond to give New York City a system to maintain COVID patients and COVID symptoms and COVID registration and 311. And that weekend, it was March 6th, we received a call from an amazing leader, Commissioner Tish. And at 5 p.m., we received a call saying how quick we build this on Cork for New York City. And we worked over the weekend. So my kids, Spencer, Rebecca, Scott, all came in on the weekend with me. And we had about 80 employees just on their own time show up and say, how do we do this in a way? And it was ready Monday morning. And it went live that week after all the compliance and security and vulnerability tests, and we became the epicenter for New York City. And then we delivered 150 million of donations in Uncork. We delivered 50 million meals all through Uncork, which basically, without one line of code, hired 18,000 drivers through Uncork, which didn't have work before. And those are the numbers which
impressive.
Yeah, I love it because it's what I tell my kids is look, a technology company that is actually doing good right now in the midst of this pandemic and challenge as opposed to post. And it's amazing to be able to contribute back.
Exactly. It is so impressive what you did in that short amount of time. That just goes to show, the effects of this. So I have to quickly, I know I have a few more questions, so I'm going to try to run through these quickly. I'm wondering what companies, besides your own, of course, would you invest in today for the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. So definitely, the stock that I've had in my company is what, we buy most. And everything I look at is, if I sold a share, what would I buy? There are many opportunities out there I see as well that just are doing great things.
Well, what shapes the way you look at the future?
Yeah, it's exciting to me. It's every day is opportunistic what tomorrow could be. So where could we enable people to succeed and do more than they thought they can do? And I think my job as a leader has always been to enable people to achieve things they didn't think they could achieve. I think that's what it's about. Doesn't matter what level you're at. Doesn't matter if you're. We just hired 2 more 16-year-old apprentices through a program Here to Here that we're involved with in Job Council, New City. Amazing kids. We got to meet them yesterday, and they spoke to entire 300 employees in our company, and that's in charge of the other ones that we've hired, Landon and others before. And you actually watch these kids build software and present to the business and present back to us. And there's no looking back. You're going to either drive as fast as you can and succeed, or you're going to fall and learn from it. And that's okay. You try it again when it happens, and you just get back up and try again. So fearlessness is something which has been in our organization and which we're very proud of. And
so keep changing the world. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me on. Take care. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks so much to Christy Ross and Gary Hilberman and the entire team at Uncork. Fellow Twinians, you've just met a baby unicorn. Only 3 years old. Imagine where Uncork will be in a decade. Now we're going to a break. For all of those of us joining from our live stream, feel free to take a break or perhaps consider the questions in our TwinTech study guide available on the live stream site. For all of our TwinTech 2020 delegates, go to the sessions rooms, find an open room with a few of your fellow Twinians, and have a quick chat about what you're hearing today. This is your in-the-hall coffee break, except that it's online. We'll see you back right here in 15 minutes.